There is a series of events that happened in my lifetime that would indicate that the murders that we've had, that the attacks upon the World Trade Center, etc., have been planned. It's been by design. And one would have to come to the conclusion that it was all prepared well in advance. Jim Fetzer is doing and has done volumes, and I mean volumes on this subject. I met a gentleman named Rosie Greer. Rosie Greer was at the convention which was to anoint Robert Kennedy when he was to run for president. I convinced myself that he was about to be killed, that they would not allow him to run for president because he would expose the leadership around the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. 6 days before this event was to happen, 6 days before this event was to happen, I wound up at the Ambassador Hotel. This was after this was after making the prediction that John F. Kennedy was to be killed. That John F. Kennedy would be killed. I'm convinced that they meaning the Illuminati, that orchestrates these plans, have laid it out well in advance so that there won't be a hang-up. Now, I talked to Roosevelt Greer, who just happened to be at the Ambassador Hotel the night that Bobby Kennedy was shot. Roosevelt was to be the bodyguard for the Kennedys. He was to save their day. But I left the Ambassador Hotel right outside the arena to find that Bobby Kennedy had already been shot. To find that Bobby Kennedy was already been shot. And I said, how could they plan this so well? I talked to a friend of mine who was head of the Cubans against Castro, Alpha 66, UNAR, a high-ranking officer with Fidel Castro. And Fidel Castro was incited at one time to make a lot of predictions. And there was one fellow at that day meeting that my friend attended, who was at a meeting of the SDS, Students for Democratic Society. That's at the time that KPFK was on the air. And Dorothy, who was executive secretary of the Communist Party, she worked with me over at KPFK. we were predicting something to happen. I got into a verbal fight with Joe Pine in the air, and he was talking trash, as he generally did. And I said, well, if you want to have it out, we'll have it out right now. Joe Pine was a Saturday Night Patriot. And we were putting out bumper stickers. Keep the faith, Kennedy Powell, 68. Kennedy was being indicted, in essence, by the press, and Powell was on the run. All of these events happened when my friend Richard Arnold and I were in the move to replace the Republican nominee for president. But that is another story, because we know that the Republican nominee became Ronald Wilson Reagan, Mr. 666 himself. Now, Jim Fetzer, where does he play into this thing? How does he fit in? How could anyone make a determination that the Illuminati or Illuminati was planning on killing that would like to be president, and had they, in fact, killed the president? Well, Rosie Greer and I are making a film, and I hope that Jim Fetzer is going to be involved in it. See, it's an important amount of it's an important part of history when you kill a president. I got a call about 4 weeks ago saying that Billy Saul Estes was going to go public. Billy Saul Estes was going to tell us about who, in fact, killed the president. And then Billy Saul Estes died, which coincidentally was the same result of when Jesse Ventura did a film with me before I left the Midwest. The fellow that I was going to do the film with, Fred Bell, died. You say, well, how could that just coincidentally happen? Fred Bell and I had a conversation. He went back to the Millennium Hotel, and he dropped dead. I don't think a lot of these incidents happen by accident. I'm taking a look at one individual in my life who's resulted in my making a significant change in explaining the series of events that led to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King, and the attempted assassination of George Wallace. I'm saying that is all linked. I'm saying the whole series of events are linked. Jim, put it together.
Well, Anthony, I think you're certainly right in your general conception of recent American history. We know, for example, that in the aftermath of the death of John F. Kennedy, we had a succession of presidents who would never have held that office. Apart from his assassination, those included, of course, Lyndon Johnson, but also Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, George Herbert Walker Bush, and eventually, of course, W., who never would have been taken seriously for that office had his father not previously occupied it. And as you imply, Ronald Reagan's own presidency may have had aspects of duplicity about it. The more I gain insight about Reagan, the more I suspect that he was a very different kind of person than the American public took him to be, just as our present President Barack Obama appears to be a very different type of person than those of us who supported him with so much enthusiasm when he was first running for office.
Now, they used to call him Red Ronnie in college. And this was not because he was conservative. There are so many aspects to this conspiracy, if you will, that lead up to the fact that our political leaders are being killed, have been killed, and will be killed if we do not incite a revelation to avoid a revolution.
Well, it's certainly the case that the assassinations of the 1960s, including Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, had the effect of decapitating the political leadership of the left progressive movement, which is very difficult to compensate for because it's rare that you find intelligent, charismatic, principled leaders who are capable of outlining a program, an agenda for the nation that can win widespread support in those individuals. JFK, Bobby, and Martin, most obviously, Malcolm X in a more subtle way to a particular segment of our society were making those kinds of impacts which were feared by the conservative right and where powerful interests wanted to be sure that their influence did not long endure.
Well, my friend Gary Richard Arnold, whose campaign I managed as he ran for office against Leon Panetta, and I were in the White House. Well, I dropped him off. I gave him a thumbs up. He got out of a taxi cab and went over to the guard gate. And I get back to a paper that I was writing for, which was called The Spotlight. A fellow came over and said, you got to come here right now. I said, I'm busy right now. He says, you got to get here now. N-O-W. By the time I had left the Spotlight, another set of characters appeared on camera with Gary Richard Arnold. Tell us how that transpired into publicity that mounted a campaign in national scope.
Well, you're right. We had already discovered and been messed with by intelligence agencies in the city of Santa Cruz. I was running against Leon Panetta and criticizing the Reagan administration for doing the exact opposite of what it said it was supposed to be doing. He said he'd go in a different direction, and he criticized Carter for having trilateral members and members from the Council on Foreign Relations, and Reagan had appointed more. And he reversed himself. He was sending the wheat to the Soviet Union and supporting bank loans for Eastern European countries while pretending he was this great anti-communist. But in the city of Santa Cruz, we found out that one of the local reporters was approached by a local security agency called Hawk International, and that they were hired by Rockefeller Family Associates out of New York City to do an investigation of myself. And it turns out that the head of Rockefeller Family Associates was J. Richardson Dilworth, who was a member of Skull and Bones, that secret society that was formed in 1832 to protect a establishment that was pushing a world government. Turns out Ronald Reagan, for 13 years, was on the letterhead of the United World Federalist and very active with Cord Meyer, who's intelligence operative connected with Allen Dulles and the American Committee for United Europe. So all of this had to do with the umbrella organizations pushing for a regional European Union, a North American Union, the destruction of representative government. But it was clear that we had rustled their feathers and destroyed their picture, their artificial picture of how the world works. Using their two wire services and 3 networks, we penetrated that fraud.
Well, along comes Jim Fetzer. Jim has analyzed what was going on behind the scenes, not only taking a look at the Kennedys, but taking a look at Lyndon Baines Johnson in his involvement in the assassination of the president. And more recently, I've had somebody contact me with a story. They contacted me with a story. This is Billy Saul Estes, or some representative Billy Saul Estes, who said that Billy Saul is going to go public. He's going to expose Lyndon Baines Johnson's role in the assassination of the president. And taking a look at what was going on in the meantime in Republican politics, we find that a few individuals had been exposed that would indicate that Ronald Reagan, or Red Ronnie as we used to call him, was not an advocate of the right wing or libertarian politics. He was actually involved in the politics of the left. That's going to come as a great shock to many old guard Republicans that had faith that Ronald Reagan was going to turn it around. Well, he didn't turn around. And there was no intention to have him turn around in any way, at any time, for any reason. Jim, we're taking a look at some of the story. Rosie Greer took the gun out of the hands of Sirhan. Really moments after he had shot the president. And I had predicted that the president would be shot. I just didn't think it was going to be that quick and that impactful. I had a reporter named Walter Winchell who came over and handled the press conference that I first started with, which was saying that Sirhan had been hypnotized. He was designed, set up to kill Kennedy. He had never, in his lifetime, felt that he had killed Kennedy. He's still in a quandary about it. He's been up there in prison for years. He still doesn't believe that he actually did it. He did it. And the book, this the man, the mysticism, and the murder, by John Steinbacher, revealed that fact. In another book by the Random House publication, stated that I was one of the people being investigated on the Kennedy assassination. Because how could I know so much about what was going to happen? But it did happen. And I am interested in getting Jim Fetzer, Roosevelt Greer, Gary Arnold, and myself to delve into the elimination of Billy Saul Estes. Now, Billy Saul was an old guy. Maybe he died on his own. Maybe like the guest over with the Jesse Ventura show. He got a little help. Give us his.
Well, I think there are excellent reasons why Sirhan would not remember killing Bobby Kennedy, since Sirhan did not kill Bobby Kennedy. Sirhan was obviously under hypnotic suggestion. His repetitive handwriting, RFMSI, is symptomatic thereof. A psychiatrist who worked for the CIA boasted of having hypnotized him. He was clearly a distraction to convince those in the pantry that the threat to Bobby was from in front, when in fact he was shot 3 or 4 times from behind. As Thomas Noguchi, the medical examiner for Los Angeles County, world famous for his expertise, concluded, in fact, the bullet that killed Bobby entered behind his right ear from a distance of about 1.5 inches. Sirhan was never closer than several feet to Bobby and could not possibly have fired the shot that killed him, which means, of course, that the Los Angeles police were complicit in covering it up, and in my opinion, also in its planning. They would dismantle the pantry and destroy all its parts, which showed as many as 14 shots had been fired during the assassination, and destroying it on the grounds, Daryl Gates claimed, that it wouldn't fit into a card file, which of course is simply absurd. This is the most important death in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. There are striking parallels with the assassination of his older brother, where we have more than 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in setting him up for the hit, where the CIA, military, mafia, anti-Castro Cubans, and local law enforcement, including a deputy sheriff and a Dallas policeman, were involved in the actual shooting, where the FBI was used to cover it up, where J. Edgar and Lyndon Johnson were principals, and where Texas oilmen were involved in the financing. Billy Saul, who knew some of the key players up close and personal, told a French investigative reporter named William Raymond that Lyndon had sent Cliff Carter, as chief administrative assistant, down to Dallas to make sure all the arrangements were in place for the assassination. And Lyndon's personal hitman, Malcolm Mac Wallace, who murdered at least a dozen people for Lyndon, including one of his own sisters, appears to have been one of the shooters.
Jim, I saw Sirhan up close, about as close as I am to the camera. And in my opinion, as a hypnotist, and seeing the man alive, face to face, it is my opinion that Sirhan did not kill Kennedy. A friend of mine who was working with the Herald Examiner at the time came out with a document which showed that the gun that the police department showed before the papers was not the same gun. You can't kill the president with a gun that is not the same gun. After having a long talk with my friend Rosie Greer, he said it was damn near impossible for him to break the hold that Sirhan held upon the gun. We're talking about a man that probably weighed at the time 230 pounds, 330 pounds. He was big, he was buff, he was rough, he's tough. And Sirhan was about 145 at most. And it was difficult for him to wrest the gun from Sirhan's hands. And when doing so, he handed the gun over to a ball player who also had the ability to certainly end the confrontation. But we're taking a look at a set of incidences that happened almost instantaneously. Sirhan was pulled out of the kitchen. He went right by me. And Jose Duarte, who was the leading anti-communist in the Cuban Committee, called me, said, "Hey, listen, man," he said, this Sirhan character. He said he just had a fight with him about 3 weeks before at a meeting of the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society. That was in the Los Feliz area. In fact, Sirhan said, "What America needs is another Fidel Castro." Castro was in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, as was, how can this information be ignored? I wrote a book with John Steinbacher, and it pinned the tail on the donkey. Jim Fetzer has pinned the tail on the donkey. And I'm thinking, either the LA Police Department are just a couple of asses, or do we think that it's part of the plot? The publishing house of Random House started an investigation, not of Sirhan, but of Anthony John Hilder. And my friend at the time, Walter Winchell, had been taking up the baton in carrying out the story through the McNaught Syndicate. And we had in excess of 900 papers carrying the story from border to border and coast to coast. Sirhan did not kill or execute Bobby Kennedy. And Billy Solis and LBJ were up to their ass in assassinating the president.
I expect, Anthony, that the two guns can be explained in the following fashion. They initially booked the weapon that Sirhan had in his possession, which they were virtually unable to wrest from his grip, and then subsequently made a substitution of the similar weapon that had been used to kill him in order to connect ballistically the actual death of Bobby with the weapon they placed into custody by way of substitution. In Dallas, a similar phenomenon took place. A Mannlicher Carcano was planted in the book depository, but had not been used to shoot the president, while a second Mannlicher Carcano had been used to fire at him from the Dal Tex, where there was a broom closet for a uranium mining company that was a CIA asset, and where an anti-Castro Cuban by the name of Nestor Tony Esquerero fired 3 shots with what I believe was the only unsilenced weapon used in Dealey Plaza, one of which missed and injured a distant bystander by the name of James Tague, a second of which missed and hit a chrome strip over the limousine windshield, the third of which hit JFK in the back of the head after William Greer, the driver, had brought the limousine to a halt. So that the weapon that was booked by the Dallas Police Department that had been found in the book depository was replaced by the weapon that Tony Escudero had actually used to fire at the president when all of the evidence was transferred to Washington, D.C., because when we compare photographs of the weapon that the Dallas police had booked with the weapon that the FBI had booked in Washington, they are not the same. And I'm very confident that this is the explanation of why.
Well, I had an explanation from the reporter, the photographer at a paper that I was working for when I was working with Laird International. The gun was not was not the same that shot Bobby Kennedy. Was not the same gun. A different ID. That didn't happen by accident. Somebody had to make it happen. To blame me for having hypnotized Sirhan is bizarre. I mean, that would be like blaming Rosie Greer for killing Kennedy. Rayford Johnson is the guy who picked up the gun and gave it to Rayford Johnson immediately after the assassination story had sort of come to a close. And as I understand from Rosie, he put it in his pocket. And for a man that is accused of associations with Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and wrote the book Lucifer magazine, and was an associate of Ledbetter, the stretching, the connections to the Theosophical Society and the Rosicrucians will convince any, I believe, logical mind that this whole thing is set up. And when we start putting these pieces together, going back to the time in at the hotel, I'm saying that the scenario that supposedly the superintendent of schools, or the fellow running Max Rafferty, the man who was running for superintendent of school at the same time that Sirhan was being shot, supposedly by this man, is beyond bizarre and totally, absolutely preposterous. What's your take on it, my friend?
Well, I think you're on the right path, Anthony, and that exposing the truth about the assassinations of the Kennedy brothers is extremely important to understanding American history. We have been lied to again and again and again. We're approaching the observance of the 50th year since JFK was taken out. And as Jack Ruby observed, the country is going to have a whole new form of government now because JFK was our last properly elected president, and manipulation has intervened ever since, where every president who occupied that office knew that he was serving at the barrel of a rifle and where anything was possible. Now, with the introduction of electronic voting machines, which are controlled and dominated by those associated with the Republican Party, combined with the gerrymandering of districts, the Republicans have virtually established a permanent lock on the legislatures of many states across this country, and they act with impunity in implementing an ideological agenda that is quite contrary to the best interests of the people. And even when they seek to resist, as in the recent recall election, of Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, where I presently reside, it is evident that the control of the voting machines enables even a powerful populist movement by the people to be undone basically at the press of a button, where all you have to do is know which candidate is going to get more votes. And if it's not your preferred candidate, then you simply have the votes cast for the other candidate count as though they were for your candidate. And then you get the total overall proper number of votes cast, but they're distributed the opposite way in which the voters had cast them. The situation we're in politically is astonishing because money has assumed such a powerful place due to the colossal blunder of the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court. Anthony, unless we can get rid of electronic voting machines, undo gerrymandered districts by having objective panels, control redistricting and getting powerful special interest money out of elections, I think there's very slight chance that the American people can regain control of their own political destiny.
Well, Jim, I disagree with you entirely. You say a slight chance. I say no chance. We have no chance at all. We've got to resurrect the assassinations. We've got to find out who did these things. The call from someone in and around Billy Saul Estes, had I been able to take it, might well have shown a different story. And my friend Gary Richard Arnold understands that it's basically two parties. The Republicans and the Democrats serving the same box, the same boss. And the result seems to be always the same. God help us if we don't wake up. Gary?
Yeah, well, you look at the intelligence agencies that have been involved with all of this. You used to think, when you're being brought up, you think of the little dictatorships and overthrows in South America and in Africa and places like that as being typical of a third world country, when really right here it's been in practice for some time. And Dr. Anthony Sutton's uncovery of the skull and bones and their positioning inside the intelligence agencies and the OSS and throughout the investigations. David Boron, who's now in charge of Oklahoma University, training Interpol and people from the Department of Justice and all those organizations.
I saw a statement by Casey on a billboard put out by Barbara Tavares. You saw it today. We're talking about the intelligence agency of the central of the key boys are planning the things out just like 911 was planned out. It's by design. It's done by design from Israel. It's been by design from multiple agencies. But they all always have one design in mind: to reduce the population of the planet, to bring in the likes of the Skull and Bones, the Brotherhood of Death, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, and they operate out of California and the Bohemian Grove. Am I wrong?
I'm sorry to say, Anthony, you're exactly right.
My friends, thank you all for listening and bearing with a man who's just had a stroke, or I shouldn't say just had, but it affects my voice, but it does not affect my clarity.